Okay, so in Zoom class the other day, we went through attaching the ball to this curve. There's also the 2 tutorials that show you how to do that and all the math that goes along, well, all the math, a little bit of math that goes along with it. So I wanted to kind of reiterate a couple points. Let me move out here. So I animated this so that the ball pauses along the curve. And showed that there's a relationship between the speed that the object travels along the curve and the rotation, now that we've figured out what the math is, right? I'm going to do something like that again to demonstrate this idea, but I'm going to go at frame 90, it finishes, right? And then I'm going to pause, and then I'm going to roll the ball back, actually right along the curve. The fact that it's almost straight right here, I'm just going to use that to my advantage. There are obviously a bunch of different ways I could approach this. We did this from 0 to 90, so I'm gonna actually, let's make this more like 250 frames, right? So I have a little bit of space here. And the two things that I'm gonna animate, where I'm gonna make this change, the first thing was on the blue handle, the ball move control. So I animated the rotate, right? When we get to frame 90, it's at 0. The other thing that I animated is the locator. So I'm gonna hold down on Mac the Command key, not Shift. Shift would select everything in between the two things. And when you do this, I think I don't think it is important to select the blue move control first. It's just a selection thing, because if I select that one first and then I hold down the Command key here and I select the locator, because it was selected second, shows up over here in the list, and connected to it is an input, the motion path itself, right? And there's that U value, which determines how it travels along the object, right? So the first thing was the rotate X, there's that one. And I'm gonna hold down the Command key again, so I can also select the U value, right? So your view might look different based on whatever viewport you have. So in the view, Maya has these absolute stacked view, which is basically stacked normalized view, and the normalized view. So if I hit 1, you can see here's all the values. This shows me the numbers related, right? The U value goes from 0 to 1, so it looks like nothing is happening. And the rotate X goes from 3,222 or 23 or something like that, right? And it goes all the way to 0. If I hit 2 on the keyboard, this normalizes each of the curves, and we're going to use this view later here in a minute. And if I hit 3, I only see the one of them because I only see the one view or the one curve, it's the rotate X, but the other one is actually underneath it right now. So they look very much the same, so therefore their speed is the same. It's proportional to each other. Now that I figured out the right distance or speed that it goes along. All right. So what I want to do is I'm going to add some keyframes to this so that each of them ends up being, what I want is actually the curve to come in, or the ball to come in and pause at this point, and then and then roll back a little bit. So I'm going to go maybe to frame, I don't know, let's do 116. So almost just a little over a second, I guess. And I could just right-click a keyframe here, but then I'd also have to go select the ball move control. So the nice thing I can do is select both of those curves, and wherever my point in time is, if I have a curve selected, now I could do this just with one. In this case, I'm going to do it with both of them because I want my key to show up on both of them at the same point in time, frame 116. So if I right-click, oh, well, let me do that? Oh, well, let me do one at a time. Oops, let's see it. Oh, there we go. Insert key. I just didn't, my crazy little mouse. So let's do that again. If I select both curves, so if I select both curves and then I right click, any curves that are selected, it will do some of these commands right to that curve with both selected. If I say insert key, it now puts one right there. So that's great. I'm also going to move it, and then just a few more frames right there. And I'm going to say insert key again. And the whole idea is that I want the ball to come up here, and then I want it to roll backwards. which would be, instead of moving forward, we want it to go backwards. And both of these are still the same. If I move them back, oops, sorry, not that one. If I take these two right here and I move them down, right, you can see the ball will back up to that point, right? And I could make that whatever. Right, another way to look at this, I guess you could do it a couple different ways. Let's go, if I figure out what the U value would be. So let's just say I put for this value 0.95, right? So this would be the ball kind of rolling back. I was like, oh, I like how it goes that far. Now I'm going to press 3 on my keyboard. And I'm going to select these frames here, or the keyframes, and hit F on my keyboard just to get it to kind of frame up on this. In fact, let's just select those two. Frame, right? So I just keep hitting F to frame it in. And since they're supposed to match each other as it relates to their relative speed, right? So they just kind of match up with each other. I can tweak that even further. Let's see, maybe I just want it to be about right there. So in this case, I've done it in such a way that it moves back. In fact, let's see the X value for that. Almost 180 degrees. In fact, I'm going to do this so that it's just a little further off. That one and that one. I'll bring that in. So it's kind of like tilting back. I like that. All right, so it pauses and comes back there. So it's 1. We frame the whole thing. If I looked in that stacked view, you can see that they're similar. They're the same as each other, or very similar in that relationship. Again, making these match, basically what happened is we calculated the right speed, and now that we see that the speed is correct and they're proportional to each other, then any changes that we make in distance and speed and rotation, all of them combined with each other, will be proportional and kind of in alignment with each other. So that's point number 1. All right, so let's go back here. Start doing Windows commands. All right, so my next part is that I need the ball to, what I'm going to do is have it roll back and maybe stop there for a second. So maybe I'll go to frame and a 150. And what I need to do is start keyframing it, moving up and down. And what I did here is I gave myself just a little bit of space with the idea that eventually I'm going to animate this so that the ball does some compression stuff. Oops, let me change this back so that you all, this would be the way that you would all have it set up. Okay, yeah. Okay, so the main thing here is that the ball is rolled back. I like the idea that it's like, I'm treating this as like its midpoint, right? So it's leaning back at the pillar. And what I needed to do is to bounce up and down. Now I'm not gonna do the squash and stretch. I'm gonna save that for the next one, but I'm gonna keep in mind that I am gonna do some squash and stretch for it. So right now with the move tool, if I wanted to move straight up, right? Like it's gonna do a little jump, you can see that it kind of moves at an angle. It doesn't seem right in this instant, right? It's going to compress when I get to this, and I'll do that in the second tutorial. But what I do need it to do is move straight up in the air, at least for now. And so if I double click on the move tool, right, the setting is to orient the object's axis along the object. And since it's rotated and it's not at perfectly 0 or 180 degrees, it's tilted back. But if I go back to the world axis, you can see that the object itself, or the axis itself, is lined up exactly as the world axis thing here. And the nice thing about this is it allows me to make sure that it's moving straight up and down as I animate. So I'm going to select, I'm not going to do any rotation yet, but I'll do key selected at 150. And I don't know, let's just do a little, well, we'll do a little bigger bounce. I'm going to key select there and right in the middle of the jump. And that time I only did the Y. So let's look at those. Frame. Right? So you can see this is going to be my first little jump. Before this, I'm going to do some stuff with the squash and stretch. So I'm just keeping that in mind, right? It's not just going to come off the ground. There's going to have to be some squash and stretch going on, but I'm not going to touch that yet because there's multiple problems. So as we look at this, you can see the rotate keyframes that I've done in here. I'll leave those where they're at for now. And it's also a good idea sometimes to write these keyframes or the numbers down of where you're putting these keys. Right? We can make any of these little adjustments. There we go. Okay, so I'm making this like a 10 frame little thing. It's probably going to have to go up maybe a little bit higher. I don't know. But let's just frame in on these. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select each of these and break their tangents, and right, because when it comes off the ground, it's going to be, needs to come off quickly and it needs to fall quickly, right? So then I'll just zoom out a little bit. And to make, I mean, you could do this any way you want, right? You could just hand keyframe as you go along. One way I'm going to try to do this is minimize some of my time is I'm going to select the keyframes here that we have for, I guess I want to see all of those. I'm going to copy the keyframes that do the jump, right? So 150 to 160, and I'm going to go, I don't know, let's go to 163. And then I'm just going to do paste. And you can see it gives me another little jump. It also already has the tangents broken, so I've made this a little bit quicker for myself. And now I can make adjustments. So let's make this a little bit longer. Oops. There's going to be a bigger jump. And you see that little snapping that's going on? You might be like, what is going on? Because it always freaks me out as well when I've done that. It keeps resizing. So what's happening is while I'm in normalized view, it's always trying to resize to fit within the min-max, right? You can see these borders that are set up here. So if I just go back to the absolute view and frame in there. So here's the absolute view for each of these. Right, I can do it like this. Right, and it looks a little bit weird because it's sticking on the ground, but keep in mind I'm going to animate some squash and stretch inside of that. Another way that you could work is with, so this is the absolute view, and again, you'd have to do frame to kind of zero in. You could also hit 2 on your keyboard, which is nice because then you see all the keyframes and they're not laying on top of each other. So that when you do these copy and pasting, let's do copy again, and I'll do paste. Let's just move over. So again, I'm going to just, with the idea of what we did in class the other day, right, that it gets a little bit steeper and the distance should be a little bit greater each time, right, because it flies further. So I'll just stretch that out a little bit, and there we go. My mouse is a little funky sometimes. All right, let's back up a little bit. So our little ball will roll in. Oh, that's really quick. So I'll have to make an adjustment there, right? And oh yeah, I just did way too many frames there. Okay. Let's fix that. Blue, locator, select the motion path. Oops, sorry. Blue, hold down the command key. There's the locator. So I have all my little keyframes, everything loaded down here. And I'm just going to highlight everything. Oop, I missed somebody. Oh, I didn't get the motion path. Blue, locator, and motion path, U value. There it is. Right, you know what? Maybe we'll just stretch this out a little bit. There we go. Right, so you can see the idea that it's kind of building up energy. Now it doesn't look right because of the compression, right? So it's not doing any squash and stretch. But this is the right idea. It's kind of similar to what we had before, where we're just conscious of what these keyframes look like, right? As far as the distance, how much height, how far they go, right? And I'd certainly do maybe some tweaks as we go along. It seems like this could be a little bit longer. Maybe this one could be a little bit shorter, right? But let me just tweak that down a little bit. I don't know, maybe it wasn't too bad before. I'm gonna leave it there. All right, 15 minutes, just went over, that's my rule. I don't like to go too far on these. So let's recap. We looked at the relationship between the motion path U value and the rotation. We did all the math, but once we get that relationship with each other, we can use this handy little view, this normalized view, to fit everything, right? So this is the normalized for everything. And it just shows you that even though these values are much different than the values for any of these others, they all fit within this space. You can even see these little gray lines, right? That's the min and the max. If I hit 2, it fits them all within their own little space and stacks them on top of each other, right? And these are more about relationships, not absolute values. We also looked at the fact that over on the tool, in fact, I have to select over this. If I double click on the move tool, we change the axis orientation to world instead of object. Sometimes object's gonna be the right thing, most of the time. But in this case, having world allows us to make sure that when we move it up on that keyframe, it's gonna be there. And we can also do that here in the graph editor. Okay, so I'm gonna save this one, upload it, and then I'll move on to the second one to how to deal with the squash and stretch idea and how to make sure that it's squashing and stretching in the right direction. All right, more coming at you soon.